For those of you that are joining us, you are in the right spot for Cal State Northridge's ranger-led program of Big Thicket National Preserve. We're going to put 2 minutes on the clock and wait till folks come on in. I'm going to go ahead and spam some links using the chat feature below while we wait.
I'll tell you right now in Texas, it is pretty hot outside. It's in the, I'd say low 90s, but the humidity is pretty high. So pretty warm out there. Thankfully, air conditioning is quite common out here.
That is a good thing.
I do miss some of the California.
Not jealous. We're going to go ahead and get started pretty soon, but right now we've got our ASL interpreter available, and then we also have live captioning. That last link in the collected links, that's otter.ai, is going to be a live transcript of this program if you'd like that. I'll go ahead and share those one more time. 90 degrees with humidity is not interested. If you want to go ahead and practice with the chat, folks can shout out where they're coming from. Today we've got Ranger Scott from LA, now working in Texas. We'll get going pretty soon.
Cool, I see we have somebody from Virginia, so you're probably familiar with some of that humidity. Woodland Hills, UK, San Diego, Wales, St. Louis, San Diego, Seal Beach.
Shelly, is that a typo? That's not a place. YNYSYBWL, Wales? That's awesome. We got to look it up. All right.
Miami.
We are right at 12:02. Let's go ahead and jump straight into it. Hey, everybody. My name is Chris. I'm coming at you from California State University, Northridge, Associated Students Outdoor Adventure Program, where today we are super duper happy to be partnering with Big Thicket National Preserve out in Texas, and even happier to welcome back a Cal State Northridge alumni in Ranger Scott. So Ranger Scott, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Yeah, this is definitely a unique situation. I'll say this is my first time doing an online ranger program.
Cool.
But I'm happy to share a little bit about this new place and this new park for me. Yeah, as Chris said, I am a proud CSUN graduate from the Department of Geography just last December. So just got my degree, and then the National Park Service hired me at this little park called Big Thicket National Preserve in Texas. And part of working for the Park Service, one of the neat opportunities is that you can move around the country and work for some big famous parks like you've seen, like Yosemite or Grand Canyon, and you can work for some parks that are lesser known and really dive into, you know, these different places around the country. So I've been at Big Thicket for about 3 months, and while I've been working here, you know, the pandemic hit, but I've been working from home, working on the website and working on some content and just learning all about the park, going out and exploring, taking pictures, trying to figure out what this place is all about. So today I'll be sharing with you a little introduction about Big Thicket National Preserve. So
that's awesome. I'm going to jump in real quick before I hand it off, just to do some quick Zoom housekeeping for the folks that are here for the first time. We're going to be using that on that gray ribbon on the bottom. There's a chat function. Feel free to use that chat to talk to the CSUN folks in chat support if you need any help IT-wise. Otherwise, we're definitely going to be using the Q&A function at the end of Scott's presentation. He's got a lot of good information to go over that'll probably answer a lot of those questions. But when we get to the end at about 12:25, 12:30, feel free to use that Q&A box, and we'll be able to answer some questions live if we have time, Ranger Scott. Again, I'm going to put those links in one more time in the chat box for the nps.gov Big Thicket National Preserve website with a lot of good information. And then finally, that live captioning on the bottom, if you need that, or you can continue to use ASL interpreter Caitlin, who will be joining us the whole time. That was it. Housekeeping out of the way. Thank you for letting me butt in, Scott. And now the floor is all yours. Thank you for doing this. I'm excited.
Okay, yeah, jump in whenever you need to if you have anything that pops up. Yeah, so I was going to ask Chris, if you want to put the poll up there. I'm just curious on how many people have ever heard of Big Thicket National Preserve. Um, Before I came out here from LA, I think I had heard of it, but I knew absolutely nothing about it. So that's, let's see, it's looking, okay. That's what I expected. That is definitely what I expected.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and share those results so everyone can see them in 5, 4, 3, 2. Last votes in. 5 more people.
Okay, so 89% of you have not heard of Big Thicket National Preserve. That's definitely what I expected. Said we're not one of those big parks. That's why I'm excited to be able to share with you a little bit about this place that you might not know much about, but after I finish, you might be interested in coming out here. And then there's actually a few of you who have. 3 people have heard of Big Thicket, so I'm impressed. Very cool. So I'm going to share my screen with you. I created a little presentation for you. So let me go ahead and start sharing my screen. Okay, so you should be seeing my PowerPoint. So here's my little title page.
We can see it perfectly. Nice.
All right, excellent. So Big Thicket National Preserve. Here's a little picture of being out in the kayak in the woods. So my first question for you, what I want you to think about is, what comes to mind when you think of Texas? I know for me, these are some things that I thought of, like, okay, I'm thinking of like the Alamo, Texas Longhorns, cowboys, oil, big ranches, everything's bigger in Texas. That's the phrase. And when you have a place like Big Thicket, it's a little bit different. So did anyone think about these things when you think of Texas? Anyone think about carnivorous plants, jungle-like swamps, rivers and lakes, a lot of rainfall? I think, at least for me coming out here, this is something that I would not associate with Texas. Maybe a lot of heat, maybe some humidity, but carnivorous plants, swamps, and lots of rain. That was definitely something that's, as I say here, not typical of Texas. So here's where we are. We are in Southeast Texas, right in that southeast corner, about an hour and a half from Houston and very close to the Louisiana border. So I know when you think of Louisiana, it's like the bayou and swamps and things, and we definitely have a lot of that here in the Big Thicket. And as I'll explain, it's this crossroads kind of place. Texas is an enormous, enormous state. And so it's very hard to categorize it in one thing. So you have the deserts in the west, but in the east, where Big Thicket is, it's got a lot of rainfall, so things are very green out here. And then the question we always get, what is the Big Thicket? Like what does this place mean? And you can think of it as this crossroads where you have the western limit of eastern species and the eastern limit of western species. So another way you can kind of imagine this is like a Venn diagram where you have the 2 circles, and that little overlap in the middle is where these 2 types of species overlap, and that's where the Big Thicket would be. So on the left part of the screen, you see we have roadrunner and cactus. Those are things that you find out in the desert. From California all the way to Texas and through Mexico, you see roadrunner, you see cactus, but then coming from the east, on the right side of the screen, you can see we have alligators and palmettos. These are species that you find around the Atlantic coast and the Gulf Coast. And due to these amazing conditions, these 2 species kind of overlap here. Now, granted, you probably won't see a roadrunner side by side with an alligator. You probably won't see a cactus and a palmetto next to each other, but they're going to be very close to each other. Very close in terms of just maybe a few miles or a few hundred yards away, because of how the soils and everything change in this area. And historically, you can see here's a picture of one of my favorite places that I found so far in the preserve. It's this beautifully green and lush swamp kind of place. And I know a swamp doesn't sound very exciting to somebody, but when you get in there, the sounds of life are amazing. They're overbearing. All the birds and frogs chirping and croaking at the same time, different shades of green. It's a really interesting place to walk around. And so historically, when the people were exploring this area, it was about 3.5 million acres full of these woods that were very dense, full of interesting creatures, interesting plants. And could you imagine trying to navigate through here? First of all, it's hard to tell which direction you're going because the sun is not really visible through the thick canopy of trees. And trying to navigate through this muddy, mucky landscape can be very difficult. For me, I didn't walk through this. I was just walking on the edge of it. But early explorers, they would not have known how far this swamp extended. And historically, I always like to start out by mentioning the first peoples that were in the area. The area was so dense that a lot of those early Indian tribes in the area, the Caddos, didn't spend a whole lot of time in the thicket. They went in to hunt, but they left. They generally lived on the outside of the thicket. And that's just because, again, it was so thick, it was a very difficult place to live. The first tribe to actually move and live in the thicket, make a settlement, was the Alabama Coushatta tribe. They came from what we now call the state of Alabama. They moved west into Texas and established a permanent reservation. And they're one of, I don't know the number, but they're one of a handful of tribes that actually has land in the state of Texas today. And their reservation is right next to Big Thicket National Preserve. So we work with them, and there's even a campground there where you can go and camp in their reservation. And then a lot of the white migrants that were coming to Texas, similar situation for them, they chose to go around the thicket. When they were moving here in their wagons with their cattle and their families, the thicket was not a desirable place for them. So they would pass through, they go on the edges. Only a handful managed to actually move and live inside the thicket. And here's an example of an old cabin that you might have seen out there on some of the more open parts of the forest. And then during the Civil War, which was all throughout the South and the Southeast, the state of Texas actually seceded from the Union and joined the Confederacy. But some of the people that were living in the Big Thicket area didn't want to fight for the South for various reasons. But they figured that hiding in the Big Thicket would be a good place to hide from the Confederacy, so they didn't have to join and fight in this war that they didn't believe in. And there's actually a story of a Confederate captain who found out about these people that were hiding from the Confederate troops and didn't want to join them. And so they set fire to part of the forest and tried to flush them out. They caught a few of them, put them in jail, and then they eventually escaped after that. But that's a little story of just a little bit of how the Civil War affected this part of Texas. And then another question that we get here at Big Thicket is, okay, I've heard of national parks like Yellowstone or Yosemite, but what is a national preserve? It's a newer kind of park. So we were established in 1974 as one of the first national preserves. It was us and a preserve in Florida called Big Cypress. We were the first two preserves established in the country. And a preserve essentially allows some extraction from the land and some activities that you wouldn't find in big national parks, like hunting. There are pipelines that do run underground through the park. And that's because this area has traditionally been used for oil extraction. A lot of the settlers and the Indian tribes in the area use the land for hunting. So by being a preserve, we're allowing those traditional land uses to continue. Whereas in a national park, they're usually large land areas, and those activities generally aren't allowed. You can't hunt in national parks, and there's generally no extraction of minerals like oil or natural gas. But we are part of the national park system. We're one of 419 national park units across the United States. That's why I wear my national park uniform. And if you come here to our visitor center or to the park, you'll see the familiar arrowhead and you'll see familiar and friendly park rangers. So we offer lots of recreational opportunities for the public to go and explore this unique part of Texas, which is so dense, but we built trails that take you through it so you can see a lot of these interesting plants and animals. And of course, one of the big reasons that people come to enjoy the Big Thicket is just to see the amazing amount of plant life here. And even if you're not a huge lover of plants, like I know some people will go to parks just to see this flower that's been blooming rarely, and other people are like, okay, plants are pretty, but I'm not going to go out of my way to see them. This is a park with some interesting plants that I'm not a huge plant expert, but there are some interesting plants that grow out here, like our carnivorous plants. To see cactus not too far from swamp is still mind-blowing for me. And to see these big cypress trees in the lower left picture there with those big trunks, those enormous, beautiful trees growing out of these swampy areas, it's pretty remarkable to see that. So we have over 1,300 plants that have grown here, and some plants grow here in the Big Thicket and nowhere else in the world. And it's all because of these different plant communities that we have. It's due to differences in slope and the type of soil, because you can have one area that's the soil is very sandy and it doesn't allow any water to sit put, and so that's where you have the desert plants. Whereas next to it, you can have an area where the soil allows for a lot of groundwater, or even a lot of standing water, and that's where you have some of the swampy areas. So we have that and everything in between. One of those endangered species that we have here, called Texas trailing phlox, grows here and nowhere else in the world. Only, I believe it's in just 3 counties here in Southeast Texas, in the Big Thicket. It's a very little plant. This picture makes it look big, but the flowers are quite small. It loves sunny areas. So this is a plant that you would see in the more sandier parts of the preserve, growing near cactus and yucca and some of our pine trees. It's endangered, and we actually have an active project with our biology team here in the park to reintroduce phlox in the preserve, and we go and monitor it. I was actually fortunate enough to be able to go last week with the biologists to go and monitor the plots to see where the phlox is growing, and it's doing well in our plots, and hopefully it continues to do well so we can have a healthy population of this endangered species in the park. And then probably our most famous plants that we have in the Big Thicket are our carnivorous plants. They are so strange to watch and to think about the concept where we think of plants, they grow, they take in sunlight, and they give us oxygen. But to think about these plants are actually eating live organisms. They're eating insects. It's a strange concept. And we have 4 of the 5 kinds of North American carnivorous plants. The one that everybody asks, of course, probably the most famous carnivorous plant is the Venus flytrap. We do not have that. That's the 5th one that we don't have here. That one grows in North Carolina and South Carolina, but we have the 4 other types, and they're just as interesting to watch. And the reason that they have to get these insects to get their nutrients is because the soil and where they grow in these boggy areas is so poor that they evolved over time to acquire their nutrients from insects. So here's the first couple of species that I want to talk about as far as carnivorous plants. So yes, it's a trap. If you're an insect, the Big Thicket is not a place to take a vacation. This is a very dangerous place for insects. The easiest plant to see in the park is the pitcher plant on the left. And that's a picture of a fly who was attracted to the plant. The way it works is the plant has this very sweet smelling nectar, and it attracts flies, insects, all kinds of things. And they will land on the edge there and they say, "Ooh, what's inside? I'm gonna go a little bit deeper." And what happens is there's these hairs that point downward. So it's easy for the insect to go down inside of the plant. But once they're down at the bottom, they can't escape because those hairs point downward. If they're a big insect, maybe like a big spider or even like a lizard, they could probably climb out. But those little ones like the flies, gnats, some of the snails, they will get trapped inside of there. And there's actually at the bottom of the pitcher, there's a digestive fluid. So once they land in there, the plant starts to digest them slowly over several days. And yes, it is kind of gross, but if you look on the middle picture, you can see a pitcher plant that was dissected. And you can see how it's just filled with all kinds of grubs in there. This is probably toward the end of the season because it looks like that pitcher plant is starting to die off. They do grow in the spring and they die off in the fall. And you can see that this one looks like it had a pretty good summer. That's a pretty full belly of all kinds of tasty, just kidding, all kinds of grubs and insects in there. And so you'll see, if you come to the park, fields of these pitcher plants growing, waiting for insects to fall into their trap. And then on the right, we have another plant called a sundew. This one's carnivorous, but doesn't have some large tube that the insect falls into. With the sundew, the insect will actually be attracted to those little dew-like droplets. That's kind of a sticky substance. And they might think it's water or some sort of nectar, and they'll land on there. And those are really, really, really sticky. Once the insect lands on there, it cannot escape. And the sundew will slowly digest them over several days. The picture doesn't really show, but this whole red sundew flower, it's about the size of a quarter. They're really small. Whereas pitcher plants can be maybe about 2 feet high. Sundews are very, very tiny. So moving on to the next couple of carnivorous plants. These ones are also very small. The butterwort on the left is similar to the sundew in that it has a sticky substance that you can kind of see. And there's actually some insects. If you look at that picture, you can see some insects that have been digested or are being digested as they were attracted to the scent of that plant and got stuck. And then on the right, you see a bladderwort. This one actually floats on the water using these inflatable little pods. And as an insect goes by one of these tiny, tiny pods underwater, the pod will inflate and it sucks in anything in the surrounding vicinity. So if there's an insect, a tiny insect going by underwater, the pod will inflate, suck it in, and then the plant will digest that insect. The pitcher plants on the sundews are pretty easy to spot in the park. We have trails named after them where it points out where you can see them. Butterworts and bladderworts are much harder to find. So if you do see one of those in the park, you are fortunate, and you have your eyes open. And another little interesting feature of our plants here is the bald cypress tree, and they have these attachments called cypress knees. They're very, very interesting, strange little additions of their roots, and scientists don't actually understand their full purpose. They think it's most likely to help the tree stand upright in these swampy conditions where it grows, but as you can see in the pictures, next to these large mature cypress trees, you'll just have a whole field of these cypress knees growing, and they might grow about 3 feet high. And they're, again, another strange, interesting plant that we have here growing in the Big Thicket. And sometimes when you have them in the swamps, they can be covered with moss. And of course, we talked about plants, so we have to talk about the animals that we have here in the Big Thicket. Big Thicket has, just with the plants, a lot of species of animals, birds, mammals, reptiles, amphibians. The thing is, it's hard to see a lot of those animals in the park because of just how dense the forest is here. You can definitely hear a lot of birds, and you can see some of the brighter ones, but to really see some of these animals, you have to keep your eyes open, and you have to pause as you walk through the woods and look for some of these smaller features. Like I took the picture of that lizard in the palmetto fern on the top. I could have walked right by that, but I was walking very slow, looking around, taking in the scenery, and I saw this little guy just sitting there waiting, possibly waiting to catch a bug that waits on the palmetto. One of the animals that we get a lot of questions about are alligators. So on the top right, we have a picture of an alligator. We do have alligators in the park, but they're not as common. They're pretty mysterious. They like to keep to themselves in the very wide rivers in the southern part of the preserve. They're not all over. Like if you walk through that swamp that I was walking through, you're not just going to see an alligator there. They like to be able to have sun. So they're generally along the river. So if you're on a boat, you might see an alligator, but for the most part, it's walking on one of the trails in the preserve. You're not going to encounter an alligator. I actually want to see one, and I haven't seen one yet. So, I introduced some of the animals and plants, but why? Why should you visit the Big Thicket? One big reason is that you can visit and explore the outdoors year-round. Like, yes, it is a bit hot in the summertime. So if you do summertime activities here, it's best to do them early in the morning or in the evening when it's a little bit cooler. But this is a great place to explore because it's never crowded. It's very easy to be out there and find solitude. And we encourage you to stay on the trail, but you don't have to. You can explore wherever you like in the preserve. So we have nearly 40 miles of hiking trails, and we have boardwalks that take you through some of the swampier, muddier areas. And that picture on the left is a boardwalk that takes you through our field of pitcher plants. You want to watch some of those plants eat some insects in action. We have a lot of short and long distance trails, lots of loops. You can hike off trail, and the trails are mostly flat, though we do have some hills to hike in. And if you like backpacking, you can backpack almost anywhere in the preserve. There's a few places where you can't, but most of the preserve is open to backpacking. It's free, and it's great for first timers to be able to get out into nature without having to worry about being too far from civilization. So that's a popular activity here, especially in the spring and summer. And then a great way to see the Big Thicket, one of the best ways, is to paddle. We have over 150 miles of waterways that snake their way through the preserve. Wide rivers like the Nature's River, or like on the right side, there's a picture of a person in a kayak kayaking through a cypress forest. That's definitely something that was exciting for me, because usually when I've kayaked before, it's been on the ocean or it's been in a wide open area. But being able to kayak underneath the canopy of trees through these narrow passageways through the forest was very cool, because we actually have paddle trails with signs along that path that tell you, okay, turn left, turn right. And it's a whole different world kayaking through this forest. There's lots of companies in the area that rent kayaks, and we actually do free ranger-led kayak tours or canoe tours during some of the more comfortable months of the year. And it's one of the best ways to, if you want to see an alligator, you have to probably get on the water to see them. And then here is some info about hunting and fishing. Like, as a preserve, we do allow hunting. We have a problem with feral hogs in the state of Texas. They destroy crops and they damage a lot of native habitat, but hunters help us control the population. So we definitely encourage hunters to help us with feral hogs. And then people come here to fish. You can catch catfish and some other species out here. And then another aspect is that you can come out here to see fall colors. Now, I'm from Southern California. We don't have fall colors out here. So for me, this is very exciting. I know if you're coming from the northeastern part of the US where there are fall colors, maybe not as exciting, but we do have some trees like the beeches and some cypress that will turn colors in about November when it's a little bit cooler. So thank you for attending my tour today. The preserve is yours to enjoy and explore. It's free, it's always open. And if you want to visit our website, I believe Chris posted that link, and you can also follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. We're not on MySpace, or YouTube or Flickr or LinkedIn, but Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, you can check us out and look at some pictures and keep tabs on what's going on in the park. So thank you, and I'd like to open it up for, we'll give it back to Chris if you want, and we can have some Q&A.
Awesome. Thank you, Scott. That was a lot of super good information. I'm interested now. I'm sold. I'm going to plan a trip. Go ahead, and if we've got time right now, you can access that Q&A button, again, on that bottom list of options that you got. Go ahead and type in your questions in that Q&A, and I will deliver those to Scott. Like the first one we had in the chat was, how problematic are the mosquitoes in the summer, and when's like the best time to actually visit the park?
Yeah, mosquitoes are definitely a thing here. Definitely a thing. Best time to visit, ask my supervisor who's here. Spring and fall, best time to visit to diminish your mosquitoes. They'll still be around, but wear bug spray. We have it at the visitor center, just in case you didn't bring it with you. Very handy.
Perfect. That's good to know. Good pro tip. While we wait for some, it doesn't look like a lot of questions so far, but what's your favorite spot in the park? I want the secret spot, the pro tip spot.
My favorite spot when I was exploring on my own, that swamp I showed you in the beginning, that big picture of that green cypress swamp that was full of all kinds of life, that's in the southern part of the preserve. And that was neat because there was no one else around. And I just got to stand there, pause, and just listen to all the sounds of all the birds and the frogs and the insects chirping. It was pretty loud. I definitely couldn't really hear any cars that would have been nearby. So that was a pretty special area to explore.
Good pro tip, writing it down. We got two questions, kind of the same topic. Is it safe to hike and visit alone? And then what is the bear situation when backpacking or hiking?
Yeah, good questions. Yeah, I'd say it's safe to hike alone. It's always good to let somebody know where you're going, just in case. That's the best practice for if you're hiking here, if you're hiking back home in California, wherever you are. It's always good to let somebody know. But I would say, yeah, stick to the trails. You are allowed to hike off trail here, but if you're going by yourself, I would definitely stick to one of the maintained trails in the preserve. Carry a map, carry your water, your snacks, first aid supplies, just in case something does happen. But I would say overall, it's safe to be here. And as far as bears, there used to be bears in the preserve, but they were hunted to, they were extirpated, I guess, locally extinct in this area. There's some still in Louisiana, but the black bears that were in the Big Thicket are no longer here. So if you backpack here, if you do see a black bear, that's going to be very, 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 very slim. So no bear boxes required here.
That was a good word. Can you say that word again? Extricate? I can't even do it.
Yeah, it's a vocabulary word. I was like, okay, extirpated. Not extinct, but extirpated, I think it means locally extinct.
Good to know. All right, we're not worried about black bears. Safe to come alone. We've got another one. How deep are the swamps? And with that in mind, do alligators like kayaks?
How deep are the swamps? I'd say, I'm asking my colleague here, not too, like, they vary, but maybe like a foot, on average about a foot. If you really wanted to, you could walk through and the water would probably be up to your ankles, maybe up to your knees in some deeper spots. But the water just stands, especially after it rains, it'll just sit there because the groundwater is so saturated in some areas. Do alligators like kayaks? I'm going to defer. Let me ask, what does my colleague think here?
Generally, no. Alligators will generally want to be away from humans and the equipment that we bring into the wilderness. In the preserve, we do have a very small alligator population, but for the most part, you wouldn't encounter them here. They're mostly found both north and south of the park. We're actually starting some research in the near future to try to understand why that is, why we don't have a larger population directly in the park. But going out paddling, we take many, many trips out there and rarely ever see a gator. Right? You don't have to worry about them being aggressive.
Good to know.
Perfect. I was kind of cutting in and out. Could you paraphrase?
Oh yeah. Yeah, we generally it's pretty safe because the population in Big Thicket is so small. There's a few in to the south and to the north, and some of them may be on the waterways, but it's generally very safe to be out there. We do a lot of public kayak programs. There's a lot of kayakers out in the water with the local outfitters, and I don't think, have you heard of any incidents? Yeah, he hasn't heard any incidents involving gators, so I wouldn't worry about that.
Good to know. We had another question on pseudo-dangerous animals. What kind of snakes are in the park?
Now, we do have snakes. Those are a little more common. We have coral snakes, rattlesnakes, the water moccasin. So when you're out hiking, it's definitely a good idea to really sweep in front of you with your eyes to make sure that you're not stepping on anything. Step deliberately, so you're stepping hard on the ground, very firm, so that you let any snakes in the vicinity know that you're around, because they can sense the vibrations through the ground. But if you do see one, give them plenty of space. They're there to go after their prey, whether it be snakes or amphibians or small mammals. They're not looking at humans as prey. So give them plenty of space. They'll go and mind their own business.
Got it. Another good pro tip. Dangerous plants, dangerous animals, all sorts of cool stuff. We'll switch gears a little bit into your career. But one of the questions was, do you get to propose your preferences as to what sites, parks, or places of the country that you work in, or is it random?
Absolutely, yeah. It depends on what's available. So when I was finishing my degree last fall, I was looking to see what parks were hiring, because in the Park Service there's a program called Pathways that hires college students. You can work in that program while you're earning your degree. So while I was going to school at CSUN, I was working for Santa Monica Mountains National Recreation Area, right in CSUN's backyard. And then once I earned my degree, there's a conversion status. So I was able to look and see what parks were hiring using that college student conversion status. So Big Thicket was one. There were some other parks that I applied to. This was the first one to interview me, so I was like, all right, I'm going to take it because park ranger positions are not always easy to get. So I took it, and here I am in Southeast Texas. But if you look on usajobs.gov and you type in park ranger or you type in National Park Service, you can see what kind of positions are available, what the qualifications are. There's entry-level positions for, if you're between high school and college, and then there's positions for high-level administration and management, and all different types of positions in the Park Service too, like firefighting, law enforcement, backcountry, wildlife and plant research, administration, budget, all kinds of stuff.
That's awesome. And I went ahead and shared that Pathways, nps.gov Pathways link in the chat if you want to explore some more about that. But with that being said, I think that's all the time we have for questions right now. I'm going to go ahead and share our outdoor adventures at csun.edu email. Feel free to send additional questions to us, and I'll go ahead and make sure Ranger Scott gets those. And we'll try and answer anything that comes up. Cool. But I want to say, go ahead, Scott, sorry.
I was going to say, yeah, and then like I said, you can follow us on Facebook and Instagram, and you can always message us through there. All of our platforms on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, they're all Big Thicket NPS. And if you go to our main website, there's links there too. So yeah, happy to get in touch. And if you're ever in Southeast Texas, we'll be happy to have you and show you where to go, what to do.
Cool. Well, thank you one more time for joining us, Scott. Really cool to have a ranger, especially a CSUN alum too. So I appreciate you being here, and thank you for all the super good information. And then thank you everyone else for joining us on your lunch break. We're doing Zumba tonight. If you need to get a little movement in your schedule at 6 p.m., same link right here. And then we'll keep doing national parks, national preserves, and other beautiful spaces Mondays at 6 and Thursdays at noon. So thank you all for coming. Thank you again, Scott, and we look forward to seeing you real soon.
Okay. Bye, everybody. Go Matadors.